Okay, so we're up to way number 15, which is Mishnah, the oral law. So we're all familiar, obviously, with the Torah Shabbat, the Torah Shabbat Peh, the written law, and the oral law, which was given to Moshe Rabbeinu 3,300 plus years ago at Har Sinai. In fact, the oral law, which most people don't know, was actually preceded the written law significantly. When Moshe Rabbeinu went up to Har Sinai, Hashem taught him all 613 mitzvahs and the ways to understand them and the ways to apply them. At that time, for the next 40 years, all of the Torah was given orally. It was taught by Moshe Rabbeinu to Aaron, to Yeshua, and then to the rest of the elders of the nation. It was only 40 years later that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote down the Torah and gave one Sefer Torah, one Torah scroll to each of the 12 tribes, and then the 13th one was put in the Aron HaKodesh, in the Ark of the Covenant. So way number 15 is the Mishnah, which means, it comes from the Hebrew word lashana, which is to review. As with any piece of wisdom, you have to constantly review it till you know it by heart if you want to make it your own. So the oral Torah is an enormous corpus of Jewish law that's referred to generally as the halacha, which comes from the Hebrew root to walk. Right? The Torah provides a path that encompasses virtually every aspect of life. So knowing how to live a Jewish life requires intensive knowledge and learning of the oral law, remembering it, and then ultimately putting it into practice. So number one of this is, why do we need the oral law? So the written law is a list of commandments for daily living. The oral law explains how to carry them out. So for instance, let's say the mitzvah of tefillin, right? It says, let them be totafos bein einecha. Let them be totafos between your eyes. So what's totafos? What color are they? What size are they? What shape are they? What about the straps? How many compartments? What parchments are put inside them? How should they be worn? When do we wear them? Who wears them? None of this information is written in the Torah, in the written law. They're all discussed in the Torah Shabbat Peh, in the oral law. So have these instructions been related well over time? So you only need to look at a very old pair of tefillin worn by an adult male throughout history to recognize that there has been no distortion. Because if there was, somebody would be wearing a shoe between their eyes and another would have blue ribbons, right? But we don't see that because this transmission followed a distinct process. So that's number two, the process of transmission. So for millennia, the oral instructions were handed from teacher to student, and each student would take copious notes. Then they would review it over and over and over again to internalize it until they knew it by heart. And due to the risk of inaccuracy in the oral transmission, that constant review was really critical. So thousands of people learned the same information, and that guaranteed that mistakes didn't come in because they could correct each other. Now, approximately 2,000 years ago, the Romans captured Yerushalayim, and Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi realized at the time, he was the leader of Klal Yisrael, the leader of the Jewish people at the time, he realized that this transmission was failing a little bit. It was in danger of being disrupted by the exile. So he wrote down kind of a shorthand version of the oral law called the Mishnah. And as generations passed, a few hundred years later, there was a recognition of a need for a greater explanation of the shorthand, and that led to what became the Gemara, the Talmud. And today, since then, in the 1,500 years or so since then, we have added like a codicil of Jewish law called the Shulchan Aruch and other similar works like the Rambam. So imagine when you buy a refrigerator, it comes with a small, kind of owner's manual. And if you were to buy a 747, it comes with a whole library on how to maintain it. So Hashem created the world, and it is way more powerful and, if misunderstood, way more dangerous than a refrigerator or a 747. The Torah is the all-world almanac. It's basically the instruction manual for the entire universe. So If you want to know how to love humanity, it's there. If you want to refrain from bearing a grudge, how to do that is there. The definition of justice. What does marriage mean? Right? So the instruction manual basically provides information on every topic. So number 3 of this is we have different layers of the oral law in explaining the written law, the written instructions for living. And that we use the acronym Pardes, which means an orchard, which means that the Torah is ripe for the picking. Now, each letter in that acronym represents a different layer of understanding that is contained in the oral law. The first one is Pshat, right, which means a simple explanation, the textual explanation of what the Torah is saying. The second level is Drush, which is a homiletical series of mechanisms by which we can derive the oral law from the written law. Remez, which is a more sophisticated level of insight to reveal the meanings in cantillation notes, right? The sing-song way that we say the Torah, in the way the letters are written. And then ultimately Sod, which is the mystical hidden meanings of the written Torah. Number 4 of this is recognizing kind of the Jewish experience, right? If you're an engineer and you have a problem, you're going to look it up in some logarithmic tables. If you're a lawyer and you have an issue, you're going to consult the law books and case studies and precedents. A doctor has his medical journals. So the Jews have the Mishnah and the Talmud, right? Sometimes you might find where something seems contradictory. So for instance, it says one should love humanity. On the other hand, it says that we're supposed to eradicate evil. Are these contradictory? Can they coexist? So when you run up against a challenge like this, there's kind of 2 primary mechanisms. One is to consult the commentaries, right? We have thousands at this point of years of information that helps us understand. And if you have a question, chances are someone had that question before you. So assess it from the perspective of the commentaries. And then number 2 of that is if you can't reach a conclusion based on the case study, consult an expert. So find a rabbi who can help you understand what you feel may be a challenge that you're facing and give you the clarity. So some applied wisdom for this is write down a handful of pieces of wisdom and review that list until you really know it by heart. Number 2 of the ideas for applied wisdom is commit to memorizing one section, one idea, one framework from within the oral Torah. So for instance, maybe it's this list of the 48 ways. Memorize it. Or it's a chapter in Pirkei Avos, the ethics of our fathers, or the Aseres HaDibros, the 10 Commandments, or all 613 mitzvos, right? Just find something that you can kind of conquer and make your own in the tradition of how our transmission has been carried out throughout the millennia.